Welcome back to the Satoshi Chain. My name is Adam, and today we're going to be talking about the Bitcoin rainbow chart and also the adoption S-curve for technology, which is not crypto related. It's a theory about adoption of technology across a population that has nothing to do with Bitcoin in particular. So you can use it for iPhones, automobiles, personal computers, laptops, etc., tablets. Specifically, the conclusion that I'm going to draw is that the both parties, both the people who are very skeptical of crypto and anti-crypto, and the people who are pro crypto or at least pro Bitcoin or Bitcoin maxis, both make sense to me in terms of why they are upset, why they have the viewpoints that they have, why they feel like the other one's not listening. And I'm going to go back to an earlier idea that I brought up on another video, which is about the scientific method and kind of applying that reasoning to crypto. So in sum, I'm going to argue that both sides make sense, but I'm going to also conclude that the crypto naysayers or the crypto hesitant or the crypto antagonists or the ones who are not aligned with crypto and that express pretty dismissive views of it, and I've met a lot of them, and maybe you have as well. They are simply not as informed. So their viewpoint could be right. They could be entirely correct, but at least they shouldn't be as confident as they are. And that's what I want to get into here. So first, we'll start by looking at the rainbow chart. In my opinion, this is the most important chart out of any crypto chart that exists. So let me just also qualify this by saying that you can't get magic out of charts. Charts can't tell you what the future is. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. Charting is always limited, but if you wanted to look at a chart, if you wanted to look at price history, if you wanted to extrapolate thoughts and ideas and retroactively look at a theory and test that theory, looking at the biggest chart with the most market capitalization would be the way to go. This is the longest running crypto chart ever since Bitcoin was initiated in 2009, and no other cryptocurrency is older than it. And on top of that, this chart shows the most market capitalization. So Bitcoin has by far the largest market capitalization or value locked in than any other crypto chain ever in human history. Again, I'm using superlatives here, but it's only been 15 years, and we'll see what the future has to hold. But if you wanted to look at a chart, this is the one to look at. And we'll notice right away by looking at this chart that you are setting what is called higher highs and higher lows. So in case you're not aware of what that means when we enter into the red zone, which just indicates that we're kind of overheating for sure, you'll see that for each red zone that we have, we are reaching a higher high. And let me just see if I can get this out. Yeah, you can see that as well. Even though there is a flattening here, I just want to aware you to how this chart works. So let's say the peak over here in the red, that means $15,000 to $20,000. But over here in the red, it's $67,000, and in the orange or orangish red area, it's actually 50. So this might look like it's not too far apart visually on the screen in terms of pixels, but this is a non-linear chart. So each increment you're going up, and you can see it right here, the x-axis is 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000. So when you traverse right on this chart and you go up, the units in which you're going up are not equal to each other. They're like exponentially more. They're logarithmic. So that's why over here as well, like you can see the difference here is not that much from over here to over here. But at this point in time, the yellow area is 85,000 to like $100,000, whereas the red or orange area over here is only maxing out at 51 to 68. So again, might be a little bit confusion. It's a logarithmic chart, and it's not a linear chart. So even though there's kind of a flattening out here, it's still going up by quite a lot visually. That being said, again, what I'm saying is that each high that you're getting here is in the red zone, and you always pull back to a low, right? When you crash after mania, which Bitcoin seems to be going through a hype cycle and then a bear market, a crash, you always set a low, right? You set the bottom at which you don't go further down. The only way in which you wouldn't set a low is if you go to zero and it remains at zero. But barring that, which we haven't done yet, you set a low, no one knows where it is, and then you build off of that low because there's nowhere else to go but up, because that is by definition the low. No one knows what it is. I'm just saying that at some point you reach it. So you reach the low for the cycle over here, actually, right after this crash. Let me just, I can't really get it, but it's this blue area. It was like $1. You get another low over here. So after we have a run up, that's why I'm counting it. After you have a run up, when you crash down, it was over here. It's at $200. Then we go up and we crash down, and I'm gonna say that this low over here is probably low. It's $2,000. So very interesting. We went from like $2 to $200 to $2,000. And then we're going to go over here, and our low over here is $13,000. So over 5x the previous low. So we keep setting higher lows. At the same time, we keep setting higher highs, right? So we're getting $20 or so to $700 to $14,000. $84,000, and Bob's your uncle. Who knows what's going to happen next, really, here. The main point that I want to say, though, is that if you were to zoom into this chart and not look at it, in my opinion, correctly, again, correctly means you're taking in the full data. You're still limited on what you can assume or infer for the future. I'm not saying you can perfectly assume or infer, but I'm just proposing again, very uncontentiously, that if you wanted to make a theory or back up a proposition about Bitcoin, it would be most wise of you, it would be most prudent of you to actually use the full totality of data available. So what I'm going to explain is why individuals, when I talk to individuals, they're usually speaking of Bitcoin from this kind of view. It was down here, it went up, and everyone thought they were a genius and made money at them, and then it crashed down, and a whole bunch of people lost their asses and lost their money. And to be fair, because people don't know how to use markets, and I'm not an expert myself, when you engage in markets, you're more likely to lose money than not, because there's people who are better positioned, better capitalized, and more informed than you to beat you. So the majority of people end up losing their money. And so you get in the news these big hype scandals, these big like FTX collapses. The space is also unregulated, so this is more of a meta-narrative thing for me, but the space is unregulated. There's, FTX in the Bahamas, Luna Terra, things collapse and explode in spectacular fashion. And so you constantly see this over and over again. The news is actually very interested in talking about this story, and I can't blame them. It's a spectacular story about money going up, people feeling rich, and then money go down, right? And people feel horrible, and exchanges get hacked, and that causes collapse, and there's geopolitical news. So overall, people are just awash with this kind of negative news about crypto, and they're seeing it from this cycle. So if as good scientists, I'm trying to give credence to these individuals. As good scientists, they're saying, well, look, I'm going to make a prediction that all these people who are getting in around these areas are going to lose their asses, and they're going to lose everything, and they're going to be regretting going into it. And that's a pretty good assumption, because what ends up happening is they're correct. Their theory is validated, and in fact, the news cycle comes out and says, like, it looks overblown, it looks like a bubble. A lot of people are saying, I wouldn't get into it at this point. Then it crashes, and everyone's like, I told you so. Bitcoin's dead. This wasn't the future. The technology doesn't work. It's just a slow database. It doesn't do anything. And so it's kind of like, I call it, like, I guess, like the fish brain effect. I mean, there's this famous meme that's probably not true, that fish have like a 5-second memory, and that seems to be how the standard is the operating procedure for theory creation for most of the individuals that I talk to about Bitcoin. So they kind of have like this fishbowl or like this fish brain type of memory of what's happening. And so then, of course, if you zoom out, you can tell for people who have been in the space more, who again are just using the same data, and hopefully it's not really biased. They're saying, yes, there are major crashes, there's major run-ups, and there's major crashes. However, from the perspective of someone like me, and I think many other crypto enthusiasts and Bitcoiners, Bitcoin maxis, they would say one testable theory that we would, again, you want a testable theory to falsify your worldview here, would be that Bitcoin is going to set a lower low from the previous cycle. So hopefully that makes sense. We go over here. We say the low of the previous cycle was around like 20,000 USD. And so we would say, okay, our conviction towards Bitcoin would be heavily impinged if the next low went below this value, which you can see from this chart would automatically make us go below the the bottom band of the rainbow, right? Because even if you got into the deepest of blue, you're still actually higher. Like at this point in time, if you got into the deepest of blue, the deepest oversold territory, you'd actually be basically double the previous low, which wasn't even the deepest blue. So if we went to like the deepest edge over here, so we basically fall off of this entire chart. And that's one way of really invalidating a lot of people's beliefs in crypto, specifically if you're just going by price action. I think there is room to kind of argue it's not dead, even if it does set this precedence, but it's a very dangerous precedence to hit. And I will say that one precedence we did hit in the previous cycle was that we went during this bear market. Oh, sorry, during this bear market, this previous bear market that we just had, we went below the previous market's high. So when we set a high of like 21,000, and there was a point where we had like dipped below it. You can see like a 17,000 here. That was the first time that it happened. So again, if you're looking at this chart and you're saying you really have high conviction, we never go below, in the bear market, we never go below the previous market's high that we just set. That was invalidated this time. So if that was what gave you a lot of conviction, you'd be worried, you'd be scared to shit, right? I think a lot of people noticed it and we were like, okay, that having conviction on that is not necessarily true. But there's a bunch of other things to be said about this chart as well for now that can be invalidated. One of which, again, is that we are higher, our peak of the cycle approximately every four years or so seems is higher than the previous peak, and seems to be notably higher, but that could change. And we never reach or go below the previous bear market when we enter our bear market. So assuming the bear market kind of starts maybe in a year or so, or could be even starting right now, but if it starts in a year or so, I don't expect we are going to be going near. I don't even think we're going to go near, but definitely not below 20,000 American dollars. If we do, that highly invalidates my viewpoint. So what am I saying here? I'm really describing the crosstalk between these two camps. I'm trying to explain that the question again, to make it more clear, is, Adam, how are there so many smart and informed and nuanced investors, people in the tech space who understand tech? There's people in finance who understand finance. There's Warren Buffett. There's Charlie Munger. There's Jamie Dimon. There's these heads of finance and titans and of investing, and they hate this stuff. And also the average person you talk to on the street hates this stuff. And are you calling them all stupid? No, I'm really taking pains to argue for a viewpoint that they have, which is mixed with media sensationalism, which correctly jumps onto the horrible news within crypto. Some of which I believe is there because there hasn't been proper regulation and because there's no incentive to regulate it. There's no institutional actors until recently who have actually been incentivized to regulate it. They actually want the opposite. They want to mire in its own muck and quagmire, and just get stuck in its own weeds that it's and scandals that it's producing. So I feel like there's actually been an incentive by the incumbent players, both in tech, but specifically in finance, to let it die in its own mire, its own disgusting muck. But we're moving out of that now. And the other thing I will say is that the people who are paying attention to this, we know that people are not paying attention to the news cycle every 4 years. They can't even remember, by the time in America the midterms come up or the next election comes up, everything's moved on. The focus is totally different from where it was. And it seems like asking someone to look at something like Bitcoin in a 15-year time horizon and to base their understanding of it, their projections of it, and make their hypotheses on it stand in relation to 15 years is such a big ask for people. And I'm not being facetious. I'm saying like that is, I see that. We all see that when it comes to election cycles. Of course, the US has a 4-year one. Canada, not so much, but we can still see how people lose the plot and the focus and the culture totally changes. So I expect people to be doing what they're doing. They're looking at Bitcoin from a 4 to 6 year horizon. The bear market over here, a 4-year kind of like run up, and then another bear market and a crash within spectacular fashion. And they're saying, Adam, how could you possibly believe in this thing? It's been invalidated so many times. But again, I'm saying but it hasn't been invalidated from a bigger point of view, a more zoomed out, a more meta analysis of it. This is actually to be expected at this point. This is actually what you would expect to see when you look at the data sincerely. You expect large run-ups and large dumps as well, and the 80% drawbacks, then that 70% drawbacks. I mean, Adam, this is insane. I'm like, it's par for the course actually, and only if we get something like a 99% drawback on Bitcoin or a 95% drawback, we go below the previous low. That's the real thing I'm trying to say. Do we invalidate our thesis based off of this longer view data? And so this is all to say, like, why am I talking about the S curve now? Just to finish off here, is that we really are thinking about people who are innovators, people who are early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and then the laggards. And so I think we're still at a point right now where we're in this early adopter phase, or we're in the early majority phase. I think we're actually still in the early adopter phase. I think Bitcoin, like usage and crypto familiarity, is still really low. I actually looked at that Pew Research paper in the last video, which showed that 63% of Americans are highly skeptical of crypto. I think it's become, again, because they have their theory, their science that they're doing. They are doing good science, but it's based off of a kind of fish memory type short horizon where they're not looking at the full picture. And it really does help explain why we are not in the late majority or laggards. And I would like to say too, in the spirit of falsifiability, summoning Sir Karl Popper, uh, philosophy of science extraordinaire. How can I invalidate my thesis? So let me just think about it right now. So I'm suggesting that we are kind of like in this early adopters or early majority, probably still like we're in the late phase of the early adopters, I would say. What would invalidate this? I think it would just be the opposite of everything that's happening, which is why I have conviction. So not talking about price action, but again, well, I just gave you a price action one. Of course, if we go below the previous low, that'll be extremely concerning for a lot of people in the space. But speaking more to the macro events now, not just price action, I would expect to see the ETFs fail and become unappealing. That would be a huge one. A reversal in U.S. policy, and specifically, what would be very interesting is after Trump is done, causing his creative chaos. I think it's destructive chaos and stupidity with the economy. I don't think that's very controversial, but a lot of people would feel differently. Once he's done, once he's gone, hopefully he doesn't get a third term. I don't know if he does, but hopefully he doesn't get a third term. He's gone. We'll be able to test this theory, which is if you're going to get someone in there who is less crypto adjacent, I would say it's very likely. And so will they, bring back the SEC crackdown on crypto, start suing the shit out of all these companies? I don't think they will. I think what we're going to find is it's kind of like what Trump did with the border and relations with Mexico, and what happened with his tariffs from China from his first term. Which is to say, I want to be very clear about this, irrespective of whether what he was doing and saying made sense, there were things in there that the incoming regime still wanted to maintain or thought was useful. I know the Biden regime, like supposedly they allowed a lot of people in, but I don't think that they removed or like destroyed all the border walls. They kept them, and I think they even added to some of them. You could fact check me on that. I'm not going to live and die by that, but I know for sure that they kept the Chinese tariffs. So it's basically like he took a step in a direction that was radical for, let's agree, for the wrong reasons. Let's just assume for entirely wrong reasons, dubious reasons. But he actually took a step that once he did, people were then like, okay, there's actually benefit to being in this position, and we're not fully convinced that we should entirely backtrace from here. I'm pretty confident, and I'm going to make that assertion. That's a testable assertion, that when Trump leaves, irrespective of who's in office, and even more so if there's someone who isn't aligned with crypto, although American politics changed even in this 2024 election, where there's a lot of funding from crypto into politics for both left and right, for both Republican and Democrats. So I kind of get the feeling like we're not going to be able to test this theory fully. The crypto is in now, and it's going to be a bigger part of politics going forward. But assuming that we did get someone who's quite skeptical and cynical of crypto, let's say like an Elizabeth Warren, and I don't think it's likely, but she's voiced many times, even until recently, that this thing is just going to blow up in everyone's face. If you were to get someone like that, I think they're still going to be stuck, actually, because the integration now has begun to happen. So which is to say you could invalidate me by saying like, no, they're rolling it back, they're deregulating these ETFs, they're kicking the money out of it, they're sending out all suing all the American companies that have started blockchains, they're making it illegal to do all these different things. I don't think that's going to happen, and I think we've seen, at least from the Republican right, but also talk from the Democratic left. Chuck Schumer had a podcast, like a little a video uploaded on YouTube during this election cycle, during this previous election cycle, saying that he was going to get crypto regulation, specifically I think stablecoin regulation, on the table and done within the first 100 days. That's a Democrat. That's the Speaker of the House for the Democrats, I believe, the party whip, one of the two. But this is to say that I think it's here to stay, and I think that we've got all these things going in the positive direction for crypto. But I can say that I can falsify this if we start seeing these things reverse. So again, the ETFs get removed. If any banks start actually being able to trade and offer their customers crypto, like specifically Bitcoin during this cycle, which might happen, removing that feature once Trump's out would be another thing that would be against my case, right? Um, we've received news now that China and Russia, in settling energy trades between each other, did use Bitcoin to settle a fraction of that trade. So again, I'm expecting that news to amplify, and that more and more countries are coming out saying we're using crypto as part of a reserve strategy to do international trade, specifically for energy. If that totally reverses and I don't hear anything about that and it's not growing, and China and Russia swear off of it, that would be another one. Russia and Vladimir Putin have decriminalized crypto mining now as of 2024, and Putin said multiple times that crypto is inevitable now and that it's definitely a part of a strategy for him. Again, irrespective of what you think about the Russian regime, I'm not pro-Russia whatsoever, and I'm not pro-authoritarianism. I'm just saying that it's these things that make me more and more believe that this shit's not going anywhere and that most people misunderstand what's happening. But if those things go backwards, if they collapse, if companies X, Y, and Z in America all over start getting sued, if the ETFs get revoked because of systemic risk, if both parties start saying that they don't want to regulate stablecoins and they want to make them illegal like they've been doing for the past 10 years, if all that happens, yes, like I'm wrong, and these are ways to falsify what I'm saying, but I think we're going in the opposite direction. Anyways, that's me again. I'll summarize what we talked about. We talked about the Bitcoin rainbow chart. Why are smart, intelligent, well-meaning people giving you a very convincing answer and a very strong answer that crypto is going nowhere? I think it's because they are running good scientific experiments based off of data, but their data is incomplete. They're looking at a 4 to 6 year long kind of fish brain memory that they're using, and they're not able to zoom out and take in the totality of information. I'm also suggesting that doesn't mean these people are stupid or wrong. This is what everyone's almost doing about everything all the time. We definitely see it in our politics, and I don't expect people, for the most part, for any one particular issue, to really zoom back and have a more holistic, fulsome view of whatever topic it is. Whether it's Palestine or World War II or like the Nazis or crypto, like overall we just see an inability to do that and an unwillingness to do it by the general population. And so I'm also proposing that the more sustained and more evidence-backed view is one that takes in the whole Bitcoin rainbow chart and creates theories and hypotheses based off of that, which would include not having invalidation from a 70% drawback and not having invalidation by exchanges being hacked and by things like FTX collapsing. This is all par for the course as much as I've seen. I don't think I'm making that up to in servitude of my own side. I think this is just factually what I've seen. And then I'm going to the adoption curve to just explain that, yes, there's been a slow adoption, although in the long arc of history, 15 years is not that slow, and we are seeing a lot of very positive things. And you can see as the adoption chart shows, as you there's a certain period where you move from left to right, when you move forward in time, where you start getting exponentially more and more uptake. And I think we've started that period, and the ETFs seem to be a good inflection point for that, as well as a lot of geopolitical news that we're starting to hear. And the final thing I just rambled on about was, if we wanted to sincerely test and falsify someone like me, it would behoove them. It would be on them to give you a bunch of assertions that then you could falsify in the future. And I think I've given you a bunch of those assertions. I won't repeat them again, but I'm pretty confident that I have a viable functioning falsifiability for my hypotheses built in, and I'll definitely be monitoring those metrics. Maybe you won't. I know it's a lot to ask of people, but I'll be monitoring them, and I can always do an update in 3 years, maybe by the midterms, and just see where we are with some of those hypotheses, with some of those propositions. Once again, I'm Adam. This is the Satoshi Chain. If you stuck in there for this long, you're an angel. Thank you very much, and take care. Bye now.